She passed a silent note to the Alpha King. Your fiancé betrayed you. They're ready. The great hall of the Alpha King's palace was alive with sound, though no true life seemed to belong there. Golden chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting light that gleamed on polished marble floors. The nobles, in their heavy silks and jewels, moved like insects under the flickering candlelight, their whispered words carrying rumors, secrets, and hidden agendas. Every glance, every smile, every tilt of the head was measured. No one dared show true feeling here, not in the presence of the Alpha King. And yet, in the midst of this gilded theater, she moved as if invisible. A girl who had never belonged anywhere, a shadow among the noble masks, stepped lightly across the hall. Her dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders, her simple dress blending with the dim corners where the torchlight did not reach. She had been a servant for as long as she could remember, a face never remembered, a voice never heard. Her world was one of quiet observation, of learning by watching, of speaking only when silence could no longer contain the truth. Tonight, she carried a secret. A truth that could change the balance of the entire kingdom. The Alpha King, known across lands for his strength and unshakable rule, stood at the far end of the hall. His presence was a storm held in perfect form. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of molten gold, eyes that seemed to pierce through masks, walls, and lies. He had inherited power from kings who had ruled with iron and blood, but he himself wielded it with a calm precision that made men and women alike tremble. He was untouchable, unyielding, and yet tonight, something was about to shift in his world. She had overheard whispers she was never meant to hear, whispers that carried betrayal in their every word. The noble heiress, his fiancée, the woman meant to seal alliances between kingdoms, had plotted something dark, something dangerous, and the Alpha King did not know, not yet. Her hand trembled slightly as she folded the note. It was small, simple, yet heavy with meaning. Only a few words written in hurried strokes. Your fiancé betrayed you. They're ready. The note felt heavier than any sword she had ever carried. It was not meant to threaten, but to save. If she failed, the Alpha King could fall, and with him the entire kingdom. And yet she could not falter. She had no one to protect her, no shield of family or friend, only the courage to act when silence could cost everything. She moved closer to the king, weaving between nobles who laughed and bowed in careful measure. Every step was a calculated risk. If anyone noticed her, if anyone suspected the truth she carried, the consequences could be deadly. She was nothing in this hall, a girl who should have remained unseen. And yet tonight she would step into the light. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached the throne. The king's eyes scanned the hall, golden and calm, unblinking. For a heartbeat she froze. Could he see her? Had her presence already been noticed? Then, as if guided by some force she could not name, she stepped forward and placed the folded note into his hand. The Alpha King's gaze fell upon it, and for a moment time itself seemed to hold its breath. He did not read it immediately. He only looked at the girl no one had ever seen. And in his eyes she felt a weight she had never known, a recognition, a question, a curiosity that unsettled her more than fear ever had. Finally, he opened the note. His golden eyes scanned the words, and the change was almost imperceptible. A shadow crossed his expression, brief yet undeniable. He turned the paper over in his hand, silent and still. The hall continued its performance around them, oblivious to the tremor that had passed through the king. Across the room, the fiancée laughed softly, unaware that her betrayal had already been placed in the Alpha King's hands. The girl watched the moment with bated breath, knowing the danger that now surrounded her. If the king discovered she had acted independently, without order, without permission, her life could end before the hall's candles burned low. And yet there was no fear in her eyes, only resolve. She had made her choice. She had acted because it was right, because no one else could have warned him, because truth demanded courage. The king folded the note carefully and set it aside. He did not speak. He did not move. And in that silence the girl felt a shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. The Alpha King's attention had turned fully upon her, and she knew instinctively that nothing would ever be the same again. Hours passed in a blur of gilded performances, of whispers and polite bows. The girl remained in the shadows, unnoticed by all but one. Every glance from the Alpha King felt like a thread pulling at her, an invisible bond forming between them. She could not explain it, and she did not try. She only knew that the world she had known, quiet, invisible, safe in its smallness, had ended the moment she had placed the note in his hands. By the night's end, the hall emptied. Nobles departed to their chambers, servants retreated to kitchens and corridors, and the palace grew quiet except for the distant sound of guards pacing the walls. The girl lingered, hoping to escape without drawing attention. Yet as she turned to leave, a hand caught her wrist. Strong, warm, unyielding, she froze, heart hammering. "You," the king said, his voice low, almost a whisper that carried more power than any shout. "Step into the chamber." Her pulse raced. No one had ever spoken to her directly, let alone summoned her. She had no idea what awaited her, punishment, questioning, or something far more unexpected. Inside the chamber, the air was thick with candles and shadows. The walls, lined with tapestries depicting kings and battles long past, seemed to close in as the king stepped forward. He did not raise a hand in threat, he did not shout, but his presence filled the room, a force that pressed against her without touching. "You knew," he said, not as accusation but as statement. "How?" she swallowed, trying to steady her voice. "I overheard," she admitted. I didn't know what else to do. I had to warn you." The Alpha King studied her, golden eyes flicking over every line of her face, every subtle movement. There was no anger, no impatience, only the weight of thought, the pull of consideration. "And you risked everything," he said finally. "Your life, your place, everything." She nodded because there were no lies to tell. "I had to." He did not speak for long moments after, then almost imperceptibly he nodded. "You will stay close," he said. "If you lied, if you were wrong, you fall with me." Her heart leaped. She had expected punishment, but instead, trust. Dangerous, measured, and terrifying trust. She nodded again, unable to speak. Outside the chamber, the wind rose, carrying whispers of a coming storm. The betrayal she had revealed was only the beginning. Danger, she knew, was gathering like a shadow at the edges of the palace. And the king, powerful as he was, had yet to see the full scope of what awaited him. As she left the chamber, alone in the quiet corridors, she felt the weight of what she had done. She had acted to save him, but she had stepped into his fate as well. Once invisible, she was now entwined with the most powerful man in the realm. Her life was no longer her own. The hallways seemed darker than before, the shadows longer, the silence heavier. She knew she would not return to the corners of the palace unnoticed. She knew the king would watch. And she knew, deep in her chest, that nothing, no ordinary life, no quiet existence, would ever welcome her again. And somewhere in the distance, across the walls and towers, the fiancé smiled, unaware that the quiet girl she had ignored had just set in motion a chain of events that would unravel everything she had planned. The Alpha King, meanwhile, stood alone in the chamber, staring at the folded note once more. His eyes were golden, but now they held something more, curiosity, recognition, and a question he did not yet dare speak aloud. Why had this girl, this invisible shadow, chosen to step forward? And in that moment the air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm that was coming. The girl no longer belonged to the shadows, and the Alpha King had noticed her. The night closed around the palace, quiet, tense, full of expectation. Outside, the wind whispered promises of danger and secrets, of betrayal and loyalty, of power and sacrifice. And somewhere in the cold dark, a single thought settled in the hearts of both. Nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after the note was passed, the palace was alive with its usual bustle. Servants scurried through corridors carrying trays of food and bundles of fresh linens. Noble children laughed as they chased each other under the watchful eyes of their tutors. Guards marched in precise formation, their armor glinting in the sunlight streaming through high windows. Yet among all this motion, there was a silence that no one spoke of, a tension lingering in the air, heavier than any sword or threat. The girl had returned to her usual duties, carrying linens and cleaning the corners of the palace, invisible as always, or so she hoped. She moved quietly, aware of every shadow, every whisper, every glance that might betray her, but no one stopped to notice her. They were all busy, lost in their own lives, in their own schemes, except one, the Alpha King. She had thought she would disappear after giving him the note, slipping back into the shadows where no one could see her, but he had other plans. A summons arrived, delivered by a silent guard bearing the royal seal. "You will come to the chamber at once, alone." Her hands shook slightly as she read it. Alone, no servants, no witnesses, just her and the king. The word echoed in her mind like a drumbeat, a call to something dangerous, something she could not yet understand. She obeyed without hesitation. She had no choice, not really. And deep down, she knew the moment she entered that chamber, nothing would remain the same. The chamber doors were tall and dark, carved with scenes of battles and ancient kings. She pushed them open and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of incense and old stone, the air heavy with history. Candles flickered, casting tall shadows across the walls. At the center, the Alpha King stood, his figure straight and commanding, his golden eyes focused entirely on her. "You came," he said simply. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority, like a river that could sweep everything away if it chose. She nodded, unsure of what else to say. Words felt small in the presence of such power. "Tell me everything," he continued, his gaze steady, almost piercing. "How did you know? Who sent you?" She took a deep breath. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, and yet the words felt heavy as stones on her tongue. "I overheard them," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "I wasn't supposed to, but I did. I didn't know what else to do. I had to warn you." The king's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in thought. He stepped closer, the golden light of the candles reflecting in his eyes like molten metal. "You risked your life," he said. "For me, without asking for reward, without thought of gain. Why?" She swallowed. Her heart raced, but she met his gaze. "Because it was right," she said simply. "Because no one else could warn you." For a long moment he said nothing. The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Then he nodded, slowly, deliberately. "Very well," he said. "You will stay close. If you lied, or if you fail, you fall with me." Her pulse quickened. Stay close. Not as a servant, not as a shadow, but as someone bound to him in the dangerous web of truth and loyalty. She nodded again because there were no words for what she felt. Outside, the palace was waking fully into the morning. Birds called in the gardens and sunlight poured over the marble floors. But inside the chamber, time felt suspended. The king studied her as if seeing her for the first time, and she in turn saw something in him that no one else ever had. A vulnerability hidden beneath the armor of authority. For the next few days, she remained near him. She carried messages, observed the court, and reported anything unusual. She stayed in the shadows, yet closer than any servant had ever been. The king did not speak much, but when he did, his words were precise, sometimes sharp, sometimes curious, always heavy with meaning. Slowly, a pattern emerged. She discovered more than she had intended. The fiancé's betrayal was only the beginning. Hidden alliances, secret plans, and whispered threats surrounded the Alpha King like shadows at noon. Each day brought a new challenge, a new danger. And with each passing day, she saw more of the man behind the crown. A man who bore the weight of kingdoms and bloodlines, yet seemed haunted by something far older. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the towers, she followed him to the balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The sky was painted with shades of pink and gold, the wind carrying the scent of jasmine and stone. "You are not like the others," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was softer here in the open air, away from the hall's eyes. "You do not fear me." She looked at him, surprised. Few had dared to speak so plainly in his presence. I do not see a monster," she said quietly. "I see a man." He smiled faintly, a rare thing, almost fleeting. "And what do you see in a man like me?" She hesitated because the truth was not simple. "I see someone who could be lost and someone who deserves to be saved." The wind stirred, and the king's eyes darkened, reflecting something ancient and untamed. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he stared into the distance, as if weighing the weight of her words against the weight of the crown he bore. For the first time, the girl realized that her warning had done more than prevent betrayal. It had entered a world of shadows and danger, of curses and power older than the throne itself. And in that world, she had become more than invisible. She had become essential. Days turned into nights, and nights into cautious routines of observation and small acts of protection. She learned to read the subtle signs of danger, a glance, a hesitation, the faint scent of deceit. She became the Alpha King's shadow, silent but always present, never leaving his side when threats loomed. And in return, he began to trust her in ways he trusted no one else. One night, a message arrived, a secret note from the fiancée herself, sent through hidden channels. The betrayal was deeper than the girl had realized. Plans were already in motion, designed to strike at the heart of the kingdom and the king himself. The Alpha King read the note in silence, and for the first time the girl saw his calm facade slip. His fingers clenched around the paper, knuckles white. There was no panic, no rash anger, only calculation and a tension that stretched like steel across the room. "They think they can destroy me," he said softly, almost to himself. "But they do not see the truth, and they do not see you." The girl felt a warmth in her chest, a mix of fear and pride. She had warned him. She had acted. And in doing so, she had become something neither of them fully understood: an ally, a protector, a presence that mattered. But the danger was not over. The fiancé's schemes were only beginning, and the girl knew that the palace, the halls, and even the king himself were at risk. Shadows moved in corners, whispers carried poison, and the fragile trust that had formed could shatter with one wrong step. As the night deepened, the Alpha King called her to his side once more. "You will sleep here tonight," he said, a statement of protection and command. "If anything moves in the dark, I want you close. If they try, I will not let them harm you." She nodded, her heart beating fast. To be protected by him was both frightening and exhilarating. Never before had she been seen, truly seen, by anyone. And now she was not just seen, she was valued, trusted, and in a way needed. Hours passed in the quiet of the chamber. The moonlight spilled through high windows, painting the room in silver and shadow. She could hear the faint rustle of guards in the hall, the distant echo of the palace settling into the night. And yet she could not sleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of betrayal, danger, and the man who had chosen to trust her. The Alpha King finally spoke, breaking the silence. "You are brave," he said simply, "not because you are unafraid, but because you act despite it." She met his gaze, her own eyes steady. "I have no choice," she admitted. "If I do nothing, everything falls." He nodded as if her words confirmed a truth he had known but never acknowledged. "Very well," he said. "Then we act together." For the first time, she realized the full weight of her position. She was no longer merely a servant. She was entwined with the Alpha King's fate, bound to him by choice, by necessity, and perhaps by something deeper she could not yet name. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the promise of storms to come. And in the quiet of the chamber, the girl understood one undeniable truth. She had stepped into a world of kings, curses, and betrayal, and there was no turning back. The palace had grown quieter over the past days, but the silence was not peace. It was tension, heavy as stone, weighing on the corridors and echoing in the hallways where nobles whispered and plotted. Even the guards moved with an alertness that made the usual routine feel fragile, like a glass ready to shatter at the slightest touch. The girl, ever observant, noticed every shift, every flicker of movement, every whisper that carried danger. She had learned to read the palace as one reads the wind before a storm. The Alpha King moved through it all with his usual precision. His steps were measured, his gaze sharp, but there was a new edge to him, a quiet fire beneath the calm. She had never seen him truly tested before, and now, with betrayal and treachery circling the palace like wolves, she saw a side few ever did. The golden eyes that had always seemed untouchable now held shadows, of anger, suspicion, and something older, deeper. The fiancé's plan had begun to unfold. Messages intercepted too late revealed alliances with outsiders, bribes to guards, and even subtle poisonings in the kitchens. The girl watched the king as he received this news, his hands steady, his posture unbroken, but his eyes darkened with the knowledge that betrayal ran deeper than he had imagined. "You see them everywhere," the girl said quietly one evening as they walked through the palace corridors. Her voice was low, meant only for him. He did not answer immediately. His gaze was fixed ahead, scanning, calculating. Then he spoke, voice calm but heavy. "I see the truth," he said, "more than they imagine, more than they wish I did." She followed him silently. She had learned that he did not trust words easily, only evidence and instinct. And instinct told him that threats lurked in every shadow, that loyalty was a fragile thing, and that his enemies would not wait to strike. Night fell, and the palace became a labyrinth of shadows. Candles flickered in the hallways, casting long, distorted forms on the stone walls. The girl remained near the king, as he had commanded. Her presence was meant to protect, to observe, to warn. But it also brought a closeness neither of them had expected. In moments like this, she saw him not as a king, but as a man carrying a weight no one else could imagine. And he, in turn, saw her as more than invisible, a presence, a guide, a reminder of loyalty and truth. One evening, he led her to the inner chamber, a private space that smelled faintly of herbs and old parchment. He closed the heavy doors behind them, and the golden eyes turned toward her. "There is something I have never told anyone," he said, voice softer than usual. A secret that has weighed on my family for generations. She waited, heart beating fast, unsure of what he would reveal. There is a curse, he said finally, bound to the line of kings who came before me. It lies beneath the crown, a shadow that waits for betrayal, for weakness, for fear. It is older than the throne, older than any treaty, older than this palace itself. The girl felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard of curses, of magic woven into the walls of kingdoms, but she had never imagined one resting in the heart of the Alpha King himself. And it is waking, he continued, eyes narrowing. I feel it in my veins, in my bones. It whispers in the dark, feeding on anger, on deceit, on pain. She reached out instinctively, placing her hand near his, not touching, but close enough to share the warmth of her presence. Then we will face it together, she said. I am here, I will not leave. His gaze softened, fleeting, and for a moment he was just a man, not a king, not a ruler, not a force of power. Just a man standing before someone who had chosen to see him, truly see him. You are brave, he said quietly. Not because you are unafraid, but because you act despite it. And yet, the curse does not forgive. Days passed with the weight of unspoken danger pressing on them. The fiancée's betrayal deepened, moving from whispers to action. Poison was found in wine, messages intercepted too late, and the girl realized that the palace itself had become a trap, every corridor, every shadow, every noble's smile carrying risk. Through it all, the king relied on her in ways he could not rely on anyone else. She became his eyes, his guide, his silent ally. And she, in turn, learned to read him, not just the king, but the man beneath the power, beneath the gold, beneath the shadow of a curse that had waited generations to awaken. One night, as the moonlight spilled across the balcony, she found him staring out into the gardens. His eyes, golden and intense, reflected the silver of the moon. He did not speak, only watched, as if he could see beyond the walls of the palace, beyond the gardens, beyond the world itself. You are thinking of them, she said softly. The ones who betrayed you. He did not answer immediately. Then finally he spoke, voice low, carrying the weight of centuries of kings. I am thinking of the darkness within me, he said. The curse, the power it brings, it is not enough to fight the outside. One must fight what lies beneath the crown. She stepped closer, careful not to intrude, yet not afraid. You are not alone, she said. I am here and I will stay. For a long moment he studied her. And in that study, something passed between them, recognition, understanding, trust, and an unspoken bond that neither had expected but both felt. But the darkness was stirring. The curse, long dormant, began to show its influence. The king's golden eyes would flicker with shadows not his own. His temper, always measured, sometimes surged with unexplainable anger. And at times, the power within him seemed almost too great to hold, threatening to consume him entirely. The girl watched, powerless yet determined. She realized that warning him had done more than prevent betrayal. It had brought her into a world where the lines between danger and salvation blurred, where loyalty and love, fear and courage, shadow and light all intertwined. One night as the castle slept, she heard a whisper outside the chamber. Not from any servant or noble, but something older, darker, calling her by name. She froze. The air felt thick, charged, alive with a presence that chilled her bones. She had felt the curse before in the king, but never so close, never so tangible. The king appeared beside her, silent and commanding. It seeks me, he said. And it senses you too, she nodded, heart pounding. Then we will face it, she said, together. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing against hers, not in command, but in trust. And for the first time, she saw a glimpse of something more, not the king as ruler, but the man as human, as vulnerable, as dependent on someone who had chosen to stand beside him. The days that followed tested them both. The fiancée's schemes became bolder. Guards were bribed, messages intercepted, and the king's closest advisors whispered doubts and suspicions meant to weaken him from within. Every moment was a test of loyalty, courage, and cunning. And through it all, the girl remained near, a silent force that observed, warned, and protected. Yet, as the curse within the king grew stronger, a new danger emerged. It was not only betrayal that threatened him now, but the darkness inside himself. His temper flared without reason, his power surged unexpectedly, and the shadows in his eyes deepened, reflecting a force he could not fully control. One evening, the girl found him in the private chamber, alone. The golden eyes, so often calm and commanding, now shimmered with shadows of power and anger. You feel it too, she said softly. The curse, he nodded. It grows stronger, he admitted, and I fear it may consume me if I am not careful. She took a deep breath. Then let me help. I am not afraid of it. I will stand with you no matter what comes. For the first time, the king allowed himself to relax slightly, leaning back in the chair, the tension in his shoulders easing. You are not like the others, he said. Most would run, would fear, would hide. You see me. She met his gaze, her own steady, unwavering. Because I must, she said, because someone must. In that moment, a bond was sealed, not of blood, not of duty, but of choice. The girl and the Alpha King were linked by trust, by danger, and by the shared burden of a darkness that had waited too long to awaken. The palace, quiet now, seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the wind whispered through the towers, carrying the promise of storms, of battles, of choices yet to come. And inside, the girl realized the truth. She had stepped into a life where every shadow carried risk, every word carried weight, and every glance could mean salvation or doom. The curse beneath the crown was stirring, and the Alpha King, for all his strength, was not yet ready to face what it demanded. But he was not alone. And with her by his side, perhaps even the oldest curse in the kingdom could be challenged. The palace was alive with a tense quiet, as if the stones themselves held their breath. Every corridor, every tower, every echoing hall carried the weight of danger. The Alpha King had sensed it. The stirrings of the curse beneath his crown were stronger than ever. It whispered like wind through the high windows, feeding on betrayal, anger, and fear. The girl, once invisible and unseen, had become his closest ally, his shadow, and perhaps his only hope. The fiancée's betrayal had reached its peak. Plans long hidden were now visible. A coalition of nobles, traitorous guards, and foreign emissaries, all working together to destroy the king and claim the throne for themselves. Yet the true threat was not outside, nor from the palace walls. The greatest danger lay within the king himself, the darkness that had slept beneath the crown for generations, now fully awakened, hungry and restless. The girl watched him as he stood at the balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The night sky was painted with streaks of violet and silver, clouds moving like slow rivers across the moon. His golden eyes glimmered in the moonlight, reflecting not only the calm of the night but the storm within him. "You are tired," she said softly. Her voice carried across the balcony, gentle as a breeze yet firm enough to hold his attention. He did not answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the gardens below. "The curse grows stronger," he admitted, "and I fear what it will demand. It does not forgive hesitation or weakness." She stepped closer, her hand brushing against his without touching, a gesture of trust and reassurance. "Then we will face it," she said, "together." He finally turned to her, his expression unreadable yet softened by the faint moonlight. "You are brave," he said quietly. "Not because you are fearless, but because you act despite it, and yet there is a choice that must be made." She looked at him, curiosity and fear mingling in her chest. "What choice?" "The curse cannot be broken by power alone," he explained. "It is older than any king, older than this palace. It feeds on betrayal and shadow. To end it, someone must give themselves willingly. The curse will take only what is offered freely." The girl's heart skipped a beat. She had feared this. She had wondered whether her presence in the palace, her closeness to the king, might bring danger, but she had never expected the cost to be hers alone. "I will do it," she said softly, almost without thought. "If it ends the curse, I will step forward." He shook his head, disbelief in his golden eyes. "No," he said, voice tight. "I will not allow it. You are not a pawn, you are not a sacrifice." She looked at him, steady, unafraid. "I have lived my life unseen. I have carried shadows and silence all my days. Now I choose to step into the light. This is my choice, my decision, and no one else's. If the curse is to end, it will end through my will, not fear." The Alpha King took a step closer, his hand almost touching hers. "You are more than I expected," he said quietly. "Not just brave, but stronger than any ruler, any army, any sword." For hours they planned, whispered, and prepared. The girl moved through the palace like a silent wind, warning, guiding, and observing. The king's enemies were relentless, but their unity, their courage, and their trust in one another made them a force the palace had never witnessed. Then came the night of the storm. Lightning split the sky above the palace towers, rain lashing against the stone walls. The fiancée and her allies made their move, rushing through corridors, gathering supporters, intending to strike the king where he was most vulnerable. But the girl had anticipated every step, every betrayal, every hidden plan. She guided the king through secret passageways, avoided ambushes, and turned the tide of the battle within the palace itself. Yet the curse was relentless. It surged within the king, making his power unpredictable, dangerous, and overwhelming. Flames of shadow danced in his golden eyes as he struggled to maintain control. Guards were thrown back by invisible forces, doors slammed without touch, and a cold wind, unnatural and biting, swept through the halls. The girl knew the time had come. She stepped forward, placing herself at the center of the chamber where the curse pulsed strongest. The king reached for her, eyes wide with fear and wonder. "You do not have to do this," he said, his voice breaking through the storm. "I must," she said calmly. "It is my choice. I am ready." The shadows swirled around them, coiling and twisting, alive with the weight of centuries. The girl closed her eyes and let herself become one with the storm. She felt the curse reach for her, probing, testing, feeding, but she did not flinch. She offered herself willingly, and in that act the darkness faltered, confused by the strength of her resolve. The Alpha King reached out, touching her shoulder lightly, grounding her even as the storm threatened to sweep them away. "Hold on," he whispered. "You are not alone." And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The curse, ancient and relentless, recoiled from the force of choice, from the power of free will. It could not consume what was given willingly with courage and love. With a final, shuddering howl, the darkness collapsed inward, shattered, leaving only silence and a calm that seemed almost unreal after the chaos. The girl opened her eyes. She was still herself, still whole. The curse was gone. The king stood before her, golden eyes steady, but now without the shadow that had haunted them both. Around them the palace breathed, the storm outside quieting as if it, too, recognized the end of an ancient threat. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply stood side by side, hearts racing, souls exhausted yet unbroken. "You did it," he said finally, voice thick with awe. "You ended it not by power, not by strength, but by choosing. You chose the light." She smiled faintly, exhausted but proud. "We did it," she said softly, "together." The king reached for her hand, holding it gently. "You are no longer invisible," he said. "You will never be unseen again. You have saved not only me but this kingdom, and in doing so you have changed everything." They stepped out onto the balcony, looking over the palace and the gardens bathed in moonlight. The world felt new, unshackled from shadows, and yet full of the promise of possibilities. For the first time, the king allowed himself to imagine a future not bound by duty alone, but by choice, by loyalty, and perhaps by something deeper he could not yet name. The girl realized the same truth. She had spent her life in shadows, unnoticed, unheard. And now she had been seen, valued, trusted, chosen. And in this moment, for the first time, she felt free. Days passed, and the palace slowly returned to its rhythm. The fiancée and her allies were removed, their schemes undone. Trust was rebuilt among the loyal nobles, and the kingdom exhaled, grateful for a peace born from courage and sacrifice. Yet the girl and the Alpha King remained bound by something beyond duty. A bond forged in shadows and danger, in courage and choice, in trust and understanding. They had faced betrayal, ancient curses, and darkness within and without, and they had survived together. One evening, as the sun set over the towers, painting the sky with gold and rose, the king walked with her through the gardens. No guards followed, no nobles observed. For once the world seemed theirs alone. "You have changed everything," he said softly. "Not just the kingdom, but me." She looked at him, heart full. "And you have changed me," she said. "I was a shadow, now I am seen, and I choose to stay." He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that lit his golden eyes with warmth. "Then we step into the future together," he said. "Not as king and servant, not as ruler and shadow, but as equals, as allies, as something more." She nodded, understanding the depth of what he meant. They had faced darkness and betrayal, ancient curses and hidden threats. They had survived. They had chosen each other. And in that choice there was hope, strength, and the promise of something lasting beyond shadows and fear. The palace, the kingdom, and the world outside seemed quieter now, as if in recognition of the bond forged in fire and shadow. And though challenges would come again, as they always do, the girl and the Alpha King knew one unshakable truth. Together, they could face anything. As night fell and stars began to shine, the girl realized the final lesson of her journey. She had stepped from the shadows into the storm, faced the darkness willingly, and emerged not only victorious but transformed. She was no longer invisible, no longer silent, no longer a shadow. She was herself, seen, chosen, and powerful in her own right. And the Alpha King, who had seen too much, trusted too little, and carried the weight of a crown older than time, had found something he never expected. Not just an ally, not just a friend, but someone who had taught him the true meaning of courage, choice, and love. The wind stirred through the palace gardens, carrying the scent of jasmine and stone, the echo of battles past, and the promise of all that was yet to come. And as they stood together, side by side, the night seemed to whisper a simple, timeless truth. Even in darkness, light can be chosen, and even in shadow, hearts can be seen.